Welcome to Ideagen TV. Today we have with us Andrew Means, Master of Public Policy, Senior Director for Global Impact Data Strategy at Salesforce.org, and, if that wasn't enough, co-founder of BrightHive. Andrew, welcome.
Thanks so much for having me.
You know, Andrew, you've been on Ideagen TV now. It was several years ago, and I remember we had an incredible conversation, and you're continuing. You know, what's inspiring about you specifically is that you're continuing to chip away at changing the world. What do I mean by that? You are the Senior Director for Global Impact Data Strategy at Salesforce.org. You're also co-founder of BrightHive. And here's the inspiration. You've dedicated your entire career, okay? You know this, but I'm telling our global audience, your entire career to creating a more effective and efficient social sector. Why and how? By developing those data tools that help organizations improve their impact. I mean,
absolutely.
How much more can you be doing? I mean, we could go on and on with your bio. We could go on and on. But I'd like to start by asking you, Andrew, please let our global audience know a little bit about your many roles in the social sector and where we can see some of your biggest impacts. There's a lot, but what are some of those?
Yeah, absolutely. So, my real goal, my mission is to create a more efficient and effective social sector. I believe that we have a lot of issues that our world faces around equity and justice and human needs, planetary needs, and we have a limited amount of resources by which to address those. And so the work that I try to do is try to help those with resources make better informed decisions about how they use those resources to drive social change, help organizations on the front lines of creating that social change know how to do that effectively and communicate the impact they're having with those donors and those financial providers. And I do that in a number of ways. I started a thing called Good Tech Fest and Data Analysts for Social Good over a decade ago, which gathers together and builds the capacity of those in the social sector to use data science and technology effectively and well, to collect better information, to drive that kind of decision making, to understand what's working, what's not, and why. And so we have that kind of like professional development organization. I also, as you mentioned, co-founded an organization called BrightHive, which is really dedicated to helping organizations, governments, companies share information with one another in secure and well-governed ways. As the world becomes to rely ever increasingly on information about all of us, we want to make sure that they're collaborating and sharing that information effectively and well, and in ways that live up to the ethical responsibility of organizations. And then lastly, my role at Salesforce is to help think through how we can help our customers improve the impact that they're having, whether that be a company that's trying to figure out ESG reporting or do better carbon management, or a nonprofit that's figuring out how to use case management systems to identify, how they can best support those that they're serving. So I have the opportunity there to develop new products, new services that really help organizations of all kinds measure, manage, and report the impact that they're having.
And what's incredible about what you just stated, Andrew, is that you are helping to connect those dots. It's inspiring to hear, what gets measured gets done. Right? And I've heard that before. So many people talk about it, and you're actually helping organizations do that. And so that accountability, transparency, measurement, ultimately, that's what helps change the world, right? Because if you're speaking in the abstract, we want to change the world to do good for X or whatever it may be. If you're not measuring, then how do you even know if you're making a difference, right?
Absolutely.
So that's what's really incredibly exciting about your work, because you've cracked the code on how do you really move the needle, literally. So for us and for the global, myself sitting here, it's inspiring because I know what it means to measure. And I know what it means when an organization says, yeah, we're going to try to get from here to there. Well, you can't really even begin to do that unless you know the roadmap and unless you measure along the way. And so now I'd like to ask you, can you explain to our global audience a little bit more about data analysis for social good?
Absolutely. I think you actually summarize it quite well. For many organizations, it begins by helping them really clarify what it is that they're trying to change in the world. I tend to operate from a fundamental perspective that nonprofits in particular, let's talk about them first, and then we can talk about kind of corporate organizations. But nonprofits exist because there's something about the world as it is today that they want to see changed for tomorrow. And I think it's really important for organizations to get really crisp and clear on what that change is that they're working towards. Is it, to eliminate food insecurity in a certain area? Is it to educate a certain type of person? Is it to provide certain kinds of experiences? Whatever it is, there's something about the world as it exists today they want to see changed or preserved for tomorrow. And so once they have a sense of what am I trying to do, you need to understand what the current state is. And that's really about understanding, like, where are we on this journey? If we now know where our destination is, we need to know our starting point. Where are we beginning from? And then, yes, measuring our progress towards that destination. And that's, I think, the important thing for all organizations. It doesn't matter if you're a nonprofit or a corporation. Many corporations today are making pledges to move to net zero carbon usage in the next 10 years. And they have to understand, all right, what's our carbon usage look like today? How do we offset that? How do we reduce that? So that you can start managing your performance, your carbon management performance, as you head towards that net zero goal. So you need to understand, where am I going, where am I, and what's my path to get there, and monitor and manage your progress. And then what I think is actually really important and relevant in the social impact space is understanding then how different organizations perform against one another. Simply knowing where I am and where I'm going and how quickly I'm progressing to that can be really useful. But if I were to tell you, hey, my after school program helped 78% of our students graduated high school in 4 years, I actually don't know if that's good or bad. I don't know how that compares to the organization down the street. Maybe the organization down the street working with very similar kids to who I'm working with has a 90% graduation rate. Whatever it might be, we have to begin to move to a place where we can benchmark and interpret the performance of social organizations by understanding how they perform against one another. Again, we have a limited amount of resources by which to address a lot of issues in our world, and so we want to make sure that we're using those resources as effectively and efficiently as possible, and helping all organizations learn. And if I could learn from the organization that has a 90% graduation rate, I could improve mine and become a better organization as well. And so that kind of usage of data in the social sector, I think, is super, super important.
It's funny that you mentioned graduation rate, because I do know an organization that touts a 95+% graduation rate, and I'll give them a plug, Jobs for America's Graduates. And they've done it for many years. And if anyone's looking for great organizations to support, Jobs for America's Graduates is one of those. And you're right? If you could take that and put it into a bottle and let others be able to do the same thing, wow, you're changing the world. Just like America's Promise with the late General Colin Powell and Alma Powell, his wife, that developed America's Promise. Look, they identified where the dropout factories are, just specifically on this issue. And imagine now, if you know where those dropouts are coming from, you can target the resources, which is exactly what you're talking about here. I mean, we're talking about hyper efficiency. I'd like to take a little bit of a turn and ask you about the role of technology in this. So you're collecting data, clearly this technology and a component of technology here. Are you seeing an acceleration in overall impact because of the technology, or is it in some way not catching up or accelerating because of the lack of sort of benchmarks, to your point? I mean, what do you see as the positives and maybe the obstacles in the short term here?
Absolutely. I do think the sector overall, if you look at the nonprofit sector, is much more tech enabled than it was 10 or 15 years ago. Smart technologies are helping automate things that people used to do before, and is freeing them up to use their talents and skills elsewhere in organizations. More organizations are using data and technology to inform their program design, understand how effective they are in creating the change that they're seeking to make, helping them change even business models. I mean, if you kind of zoomed back, most nonprofit organizations were almost like service business models. It was a person providing a service to another person, in a vast oversimplification. But increasingly, we're seeing organizations develop technologies, develop products, use data to actually have a different kind of intermediated experience, where instead of hiring a bunch of crisis counselors to go school to school and work with teens in crisis, you can have technology that enables you to text with a larger number of people and be able to serve a larger group of at-risk youth. We see this a lot in actually the benefits enrollment space, where groups like Benefits Data Trust and others are using data and technology to identify those who are eligible for benefits, help them automatically enroll in those benefits, and are getting services that they're all entitled to more and more people more effectively. And so I think we are absolutely seeing some organizations undergo that kind of digital transformation, figuring out appropriate ways to use data and technology to achieve their mission and to operate their organization more effectively. That said, there's still many organizations that aren't yet enabled and supported to use technology effectively in their organization. They might lack the senior leadership, knowledge to even know what kind of technologies to invest in and deploy in their organization. And they might lack the resources. Many organizations in the US are under $1 million in revenue easily, the vast majority of organizations. And they lack the resources maybe to make some of those investments that are needed to help undergo digital transformation. But I think we're moving in the right direction. We're seeing how technology can really help achieve our mission, not just help us operate more efficiently or raise more money, but actually help us solve the problems that we care about more effectively. And I think as those technologies come down in price, come down in the ease of use, things like that, and more people have these kinds of tech-enabled skills, we're only going to see that continue to flourish.
That is just amazing to hear. And it's amazing to hear the continuum of all that and the acceleration. And in terms of all of your roles, Andrew, how have you been able to help develop teams dedicated to using this data to further the impact of the social sector?
I think so many technologists, people that are in data science and other kind of technical skills, really want to use those skills to make a difference in the world. We're seeing this not just in areas that might be traditionally in the tech and data for good space, like going to work at a nonprofit or going to work at a foundation or something. But we are seeing even at places like Salesforce and other tech companies where their pro bono programs, their work with nonprofits is a big driver of talent attraction and retention. We're seeing definite ways in which people want to use these skills to make a difference in the world. When I build out teams, and I've done this work with inside nonprofits, with funders, as a consultant, I think the biggest thing, if you are a technologist wanting to apply your skills towards social problems, is to come in with a level of humility that says there's a very good reason things are the way they are. It's easy to kind of, from the outside, look at a nonprofit organization or the nonprofit sector overall and say, they're missing uses of technology. They're just not as smart as we are in the tech space, or whatever it might be. There can be a little bit of an arrogance that comes in, but there's a good reason why things are sometimes done on paper and pencil. I remember years ago, I was doing some work in the global public health space, right around the Syrian refugee crisis several years ago. And we were working with these groups that would go out into the field and do health surveys on paper and pencil and keep track of who they were working with on paper and pencil. And part of the reason is the people that they were serving they had very big data security issues, let's say, and that they wanted to protect the identity and the anonymity of those that they were serving, and were very concerned about moving over to digital tracking methods. And so there's all kinds of reasons why things are the way they are. And as a technologist, I think it's important to come into those organizations with a level of humility that says, I want to understand the constraints you're operating under, why things are the way they are, before I then try to go and like bring you on a digital transformation journey. And so as I build out teams, that's one of the things I look for the most is a genuine intellectual curiosity and a desire to honor the work that exists in the sector in these organizations, but also with a willingness to kind of challenge and appropriately and in the right times find ways to support that kind of digital transformation and show that there could be other ways of doing this work. But first, you need to understand why things are the way they are.
First, you have to understand why things are the way they are. I mean, that what a profound, you know what, we should label this power chat understanding why things are the way they are, because it's simple, but yet extremely profound, and is based on several factors that I've heard you talk about here. Empathy, right? Empathy is a big one. You were working with the Syrian refugees, and there are so many other similarities in the world today with the work you were doing then. And I think it's a lesson for a lot of the organizations, both external and from an internal perspective, to understand that there may be a reason why things are the way they are. So you can't just overlay, I'm hearing you say, you can't just overlay the technology and, all of a sudden come up with a solution.
Absolutely.
Without understanding why things are the way they are. I mean, I'm going to use that now, Andrew, with full attribution.
Yeah, take it.
With full attribution to you, 100%. But as a follow-up to that, what role do you see data as playing in the nonprofit sector versus the for-profit sector?
I mean, honestly, I think at the highest level, it's the same. Data is really good. Data and technology, like if we're going to think about AI, machine learning, put all these things together, they're really good at tasks that are done over and over again. They're really good at helping us identify, where something is different, why something might be the way it is, right? So, if you look at the private sector, they're oftentimes using and investing in data science teams to acquire more users, to improve their products, to, any number of kind of things that are helping them achieve their ultimate goal of, financial profitability. And the nonprofit sector and the social sector, it works the same way. It's really around how do we help organizations know if what they're doing is working? How do we help them gain insight into their users or their program participants? How do we help them attract, funding from donors? So like there are many of the same kinds of tasks that a company is using data science for, a nonprofit can use it for. It might like look different, the environment's different, the users are different, all of that kind of stuff. But the methodological work is oftentimes the same. And increasingly, especially in the social impact space, it doesn't matter if you're a company, a nonprofit, a government agency, a foundation. Like if you care about carbon reduction, you care about carbon reduction. You can measure and manage it the same way. If you care about diversity, equity, inclusion, you can look at some standard measures and start to understand ways to improve that inside your organization. So there's a lot of shared uses of especially impact data as more and more companies are realizing that they're accountable not just to their shareholders but to a wider array of stakeholders, and they're increasingly concerned about their what I would call like non-financial performance, the things that are their effect on the environment, their effect on communities, their effect on their employees. These are all the same things. And I think this is actually an opportunity for the nonprofit sector to say, hey, look, we've developed a ton of methodologies and tools and techniques for measuring this kind of like social change that companies are now starting to ask themselves how they're affecting social change as well.
And that all goes back to leadership. In the end, you need the right leadership, that empathetic leadership, the leadership that understands why things are, Andrew, the way they are, right?
Yep.
So, and as we get to sort of the later stages of this interview, I'd like to ask you about some of your successes. I mean, look, we need many, many hours in an interview to go through all of your successes, but I'd like to zero in on what you would consider some of your most incredible successes in terms of innovation. And to go a bit further, how did you arrive at those?
Yeah. So one of the things that I'm really excited about right now is some of the work I'm leading at Salesforce. We've developed an entire new kind of impact management service offering for some of our customers who are trying to figure out how do I measure and manage the impact that we're having. And what I like about this is we're not doing anything fancy. We're not doing anything super technical or advanced. We're just trying to help level up organizations, help them think through how to talk about their impact with clarity. What is it that they're trying to change in the world? What are the questions that they need to answer as they're doing that work? Like questions about their impact, questions about their operations. How do we help them think through what data they need to collect to answer those questions and to manage their program and to report to their funders and things of that nature? And then what's the technology that could help them do that in an effective way? I love this kind of work of like really starting with what is it that our customers are trying to change in the world, and how do we help support them in doing that? So that's one of the things I'm really excited about. Beyond that, I mean, there's so many, I think, great instances and uses of data science in the sector where we're seeing, like I've done work around like, auto classification of images and videos so that researchers and people that are, trying to study ecology can automatically classify, the animals that are in their pictures. And it saves, thousands and thousands of hours of human tagging and human effort, enabling those researchers to focus their time on the things they actually care about, which is not like looking at 100 pictures and saying, that's a brown bear, that's a brown bear, that's a brown bear. Like it frees them up to actually do their research. And I'm excited about the work that we've done at BrightHive around, helping organizations share data so we can better understand the labor market, for example, understand, what training organizations are actually helping people get the best kinds of employment. How do we understand pathways to work and those kind of things. So there's any number, I think, of spaces where I've been lucky enough to help to support organizations, using data and technology to drive their mission forward. And I begin all of this work really trying to get clear around what is it that we're trying to change in the world? What is it that we're trying to do? What are the constraints? Like, again, why are things the way they are? And then what are the ways that we can deploy technology, not where we're building the most complex or advanced thing, but what's the thing that's going to work the best? What's actually going to be usable by our organizations, by our users, and really grounding it in that. And so I think it's a really fun place to play because I get to learn about advanced technology. I get to see kind of all of the best in machine learning or all kinds of different areas, but really thinking through how do we apply this in usable and actionable ways to organizations of all kinds.
So we've driven down from why are things the way they are, understanding that, the importance of that, to understanding the impact and the data delivery components that go into this stream of impact. And so you talk a lot about impact in all of your talks. We've seen a lot of your talks. Even several years ago, you were still speaking about impact, and you've made so much impact. So we've demonstrated to the planet and the millions of people that will watch this interview that, look, Andrew Means is changing the world. That's what Ideagen stands for. What, Andrew, do you believe is the best way we can challenge ourselves to be really rigorous while at the same time cynical about our own impact?
Yeah, I think the best way to go about doing that is to use data to hold up a mirror. Like I like to think of data as not like it's not ultimately the thing that defines you. There's lots of things that we can't measure and capture in our data, but like let's be realistic about like, look, if the needle isn't moving, I'm probably not having an impact. If I can't like reflect back to me in information that's I can see and touch, if things in the world around me haven't changed, I need to question the impact that I'm having. And so I think, again, that where I really come back to with all of this is understanding what is it that I'm trying to change in the world? What is the impact that I'm trying to create? And then using data and these kind of methodologies as tools for holding up a mirror and saying, like, okay, am I moving the needle on these things? Are people engaging with me in this work? Is when like with this auto classification project, how many hours of time am I actually saving researchers? Is anyone using it? If not, I could have built the greatest tool in the world, but it's not having much of an impact. And so using information as a mirror to reflect back and being honest about, like, there's a lot that I won't know, right? Like, there's a lot of counterfactuals that I might not be able to estimate, but we should do as good of a job as we can. And what I like to think about there is that, what's the evidence that you have that you're having an impact? That evidence could be stories, it could be anecdotes, it could be data, it could be any kinds of things. But organizations of all kinds, all of us can ask, if I had to stand in front of somebody else and present a bunch of evidence about the impact that I'm having, what would I use, and how rigorous is that evidence that I'm using? So that's where I would begin.
Well, we started with all of the impact that you've made. We've heard all of the evidence on projects and leadership that you've exemplified throughout the years. And I can't even imagine, can't imagine all of the lives, all of the impact that you will continue to make in the future, Andrew. I just want to say, on behalf of Ideagen Global, Ideagen TV, we want to thank you. Andrew Means, changing the world, Ideagen TV. Thank you so very much.
Thank you so much for having me again.
You're very